On a quiet morning by an isolated river, a rich man with an arrogant appearance, wearing a dark suit, stops his luxury car. He gets out carrying a basket, from which escape the weak cries of newborn twin babies. Without hesitation, he places the basket in the water and pushes it into the middle of the current, away from the shore, coldly watching as it drifts away. What he doesn't realize is that, not far from there, a majestic white horse witnesses the entire scene. When the babies begin to sink in the cold water and the crying gets louder, the animal does something that defies all understanding. It decides to act, knowing that at any moment it might be too late. What happens next will leave everyone in absolute shock. Before we begin, if you love animals as much as we do, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any exciting stories. Thank you. Let's get back to our story. The morning mist hung over the river like a delicate veil as the sun began to awaken on the horizon. The silence was absolute, broken only by the gentle murmur of the waters flowing lazily between the banks. In this seemingly tranquil setting, a black Mercedes-Benz cut through the stillness, its wheels kicking up small clouds of dust on the dirt road that bordered the Blackwood River. The vehicle stopped abruptly, and a tall man emerged, wearing an impeccably tailored designer suit. Edward Davenport was the kind of person who inspired fear and respect wherever he went. His grey eyes, cold as steel, scanned the surrounding area, making sure he was completely alone. In his hands, he held a wicker basket covered with red blankets from which faint sounds emanated, muffled cries that seemed to plead for attention. Without showing any hesitation or remorse, Edward walked to the riverbank. His expensive Italian shoes sank slightly into the mud, but he didn't care. His mind was focused on a single mission: to rid himself of what he considered his biggest problem. The babies in the basket, his own children, were living proof of a mistake he couldn't allow to tarnish his reputation. A few yards away, partially hidden by a cluster of willow trees, a majestic white horse observed the scene with almost human attention. The animal belonged to the Miller family, who lived on a small farm not far away. His coat was like freshly fallen snow, and his dark eyes reflected an extraordinary intelligence that few humans had noticed. Edward positioned the basket on the water, his movements precise and calculated. For a brief moment, something seemed to waver in his eyes. Perhaps a flicker of conscience, a fragment of humanity struggling to emerge. But it was only an instant. With a firm push, he released the basket, watching as the current carried it away. The baby's cries intensified, echoing through the valley like a desperate plea. Edward remained there, motionless, watching the basket drift away. A cold smile curved his lips as it began to be swallowed by the water. In his mind, that was the end of his problem. No one would ever know what had happened to the children. Of the young musician he had seduced and abandoned, the white horse, however, had other plans. As soon as Edward got into his car and drove off, the animal moved with surprising determination. His hooves touched the water without hesitation, and his powerful body cut through the current with grace. Years of living with his owners, the Millers, had developed in him an extraordinary sense of protection. The basket was beginning to sink when the horse reached it. With an impressive delicacy for an animal of his size, he used his muzzle to push the small makeshift cradle towards the bank. The babies continued to cry, their voices now weaker, as if their strength was waning. The sun was already higher in the sky when the horse managed to guide the basket to the safety of the bank. His white coat was soaked, but his eyes shone with a fierce determination. The small human beings in the basket needed help. He could feel it in every fiber of his being. Carefully, the animal examined the basket through the wet blankets. Two identical little faces, red from crying, squirmed in discomfort. They were so small, so fragile. The horse let out a soft whinny as if to calm them. To his surprise, the babies seemed to respond to the sound, their cries diminishing to soft sobs. A decision was made at that moment, a decision that would change the fate of many lives. The horse knew exactly what he needed to do. With the same gentleness with which he had rescued the basket, he grasped the handle with his teeth. The path to the miller's house would be long and difficult, but something inside him, an instinct stronger than any logic, told him that these little creatures needed to get there. And so, under the morning sun that now shone with full force, the white horse began his journey. Each step was calculated not to disturb his precious cargo. Fate had chosen an unlikely guardian for those abandoned babies, and he would not fail in his mission. What no one could imagine was that this rescue was not just the beginning of a survival story, but the first chapter of a saga that would intertwine lives, reveal secrets, and prove that love can flourish in the most unexpected places. The sun was already high when Clara Miller finished hanging the last sheet on the clothesline. Her hands, calloused from constant work, smoothed the white fabric lovingly. It was a day like any other on the miller's small farm, or so it seemed. Clara couldn't imagine that her life was about to change completely. At 32, Clara carried a simple beauty in her face and a sadness in her brown eyes that she tried to hide. A registered nurse, she had been forced to leave her profession due to a lack of opportunities in the county. Now she divided her time between the small vegetable garden she cultivated with her husband and the sewing work she did to supplement the family income. Peter, her husband, had been in the fields since dawn. He was a good, hard-working man who shared Clara's dream of having children. After 5 years of trying and 2 miscarriages, they had learned to live with the silent pain of waiting, finding solace in each other and in the love they nurtured for the animals on their property. Among these animals, Silver, the white horse who had come to them mysteriously 3 years earlier, stood out. The animal had appeared during a storm, injured and frightened, and the couple had taken him in. Over time, Silver had become more than a pet. He was a member of the family, demonstrating extraordinary intelligence and loyalty. Clara was about to go inside when she heard a different whinny. She knew Silver's sounds well, and this one seemed laden with urgency. Turning in the direction of the noise, she froze at the scene unfolding. Silver was trotting towards her, carrying something that looked like a basket in his mouth. "Peter!" Clara shouted, her voice trembling. "Peter, come quick. Something's wrong with Silver." Her husband came running from the fields, his boots leaving marks on the damp earth. When he reached Clara, he too was speechless. Silver approached carefully, his movements deliberately slow, as if carrying something precious. It was then they heard it, faint at first, then clearer, the unmistakable sound of a baby crying. Not just one, but 2 distinct cries that blended into a distressing harmony. Clara brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh my God," Peter murmured, taking a step forward. Silver stopped before them and, with surprising delicacy, placed the basket on the ground. The red blankets covering it were damp, and when Clara knelt to remove them, her fingers trembled. They're 2 babies," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Newborns, Peter, and they're twins." The little ones were wet and cold, their faces red from crying. Clara, with her nursing experience, immediately realized they needed urgent care. Without hesitation, she picked up the basket and ran into the house, closely followed by Peter and Silver, who refused to leave their side. Inside the simple but cozy house, Clara worked quickly. She undressed the babies from their wet clothes, checked their vital signs, and wrapped them in warm blankets. To her surprise, despite the ordeal they had been through, the twins seemed relatively well. "We need to notify the authorities," Peter said, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of nervousness. Someone must be looking for them. Clara didn't answer immediately. She was busy preparing warm milk with a technique she had learned during her nursing training. Her movements were precise, professional, but her eyes were already overflowing with love. How could anyone abandon them? And she finally asked, her voice barely containing her indignation. They're so small, so helpless. Silver, who was watching everything from the doorway, let out a soft whinny. The babies, who had calmed down in Clara's arms, turned their little heads towards the sound, as if recognizing their savior. "There's something here," Peter said, examining the basket. His fingers found a metallic object tucked among the blankets, a gold locket with an elegant crest engraved on its surface. Clara approached to look, and her face paled. "I know this symbol," she whispered. "It's the Davenport family crest. Edward Davenport, the most powerful man in the region." The couple exchanged a worried look. Edward Davenport was known not only for his wealth and political influence, but also for his ruthlessness in business and his power to destroy lives when crossed. At that moment, as the baby slept peacefully in her arms, Clara made a decision that would forever change the fate of everyone in that house. "We can't hand them over yet," she declared, her voice firm. "Not until we understand exactly what's happening." Peter nodded slowly, knowing his wife's heart well and trusting her judgment. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange hues. Silver remained at his post, like a silent guardian, while the miller's small house became the scene of a mystery that was just beginning to unfold. The first night with the twins was a challenge that tested all of Clara's experience as a nurse. The babies woke up every 2 hours, hungry and needing care. Peter took turns with his wife, quickly learning how to prepare bottles and change makeshift diapers made from the softest sheets they could find. The most surprising thing, however, was Silver's behavior. The horse refused to leave the house, remaining vigilant under the window of the room where the babies slept. When one of the little ones started to cry, Silver would whinny softly, as if to comfort them, and wouldn't settle down until he heard they had been attended to. During the early hours, while rocking one of the babies, Clara noticed something peculiar. Each of them had a small crescent-shaped birthmark on the inside of their right wrist. "They're identical," she whispered to Peter, who was holding the other baby. "But this mark, it's like a sign of fate, don't you think?" Considering it was Silver who saved them. Peter nodded thoughtfully. "We need to give them names," he said quietly. "We can't keep calling them just the babies." Clara smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "How about Michael and Gabriel? They're names of angels, and these little ones, well, they're like a gift from heaven." The rising sun found the couple exhausted but happy. The reality of their situation, however, began to weigh on their shoulders. How would they keep 2 babies a secret? How would they find the resources to feed them? And most importantly, what would happen when the truth came out? The answer to the last question began to take shape sooner than they expected. Shortly after breakfast, they heard the unmistakable sound of a car approaching on the dirt road. Silver immediately became agitated, whinnying a warning. "Quick!" Clara whispered, grabbing the babies. "Take them to the back room." Peter barely had time to hide the twins when firm knocks sounded at the door. Opening it, he found himself facing 2 men in suits with serious expressions and intimidating stances. "Good morning," said the taller one, his voice professional but cold. "We're associates of Mr. Edward Davenport. We're conducting an investigation into an employee who absconded with valuable items from the mansion, including a very important family locket." Clara felt her heart race, but years of nursing practice had taught her to maintain composure in stressful situations. "Our farm is small," she replied, keeping her voice calm. "We don't see many people around here." The second man took a step forward, his eyes scanning the interior of the house. "Mr. Davenport is offering a generous reward for information. Anything suspicious you might have noticed." It was at that moment one of the babies started to cry. The sound, though muffled, was unmistakable. The men exchanged significant glances. It's the radio," Peter explained hastily. "Clara likes to listen to soap operas while she works." As if understanding the gravity of the situation, Silver chose that moment to create a diversion. The horse began to whinny and rear up, drawing the visitors' attention to the outside of the house. "Your horse seems agitated," commented the first man, frowning. "He doesn't like strangers," Peter replied, seizing the opportunity. "Maybe it's best you go, before he gets more worked up." The men withdrew, but not before casting suspicious glances at the house. When the car finally disappeared around the bend in the road, Clara and Peter let out breaths they hadn't realized they were holding. "They'll be back," Clara said, hugging the babies tightly. "And next time, they might bring a search warrant." Peter put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "We need a plan," he agreed. "We can't just wait for them to discover the boys." Clara looked at the locket they had found in the basket. "There's something wrong with this whole story," she murmured. "Why would an employee run away taking only a locket? And why would Edward Davenport, one of the richest men in the region, care so much about a single piece of jewelry?" Silver approached the window, his intelligent eyes fixed on the babies. Clara had a sudden idea. "Miss Ellie!" she exclaimed. "She's the wisest person we know, and she's always helped everyone in the county. Maybe she can advise us." Peter considered the suggestion. Miss Ellie was an elderly lady respected by everyone, known for both her discretion and her ability to solve seemingly impossible problems. "It's risky," he pondered, "but I don't think we have much choice." The couple began to make plans for a nighttime visit to Miss Ellie's house. Meanwhile, the twins slept peacefully, oblivious to the turmoil their presence had unleashed. Outside, Silver maintained his tireless vigil, as if he knew this was just the beginning of a journey far longer and more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Night fell over the region like a velvet cloak, bringing with it a cool breeze that rustled the leaves in the trees. Clara and Peter had waited until this moment to make their risky visit to Miss Ellie. The twins, fed and bundled up, slept peacefully in the lined basket they had improvised to transport them. "Are you sure you don't want me to go alone?" Peter asked for the third time, helping Clara onto the old farm cart. They had decided not to use their old truck to avoid attracting attention. The engine noise could alert curious neighbors. "I can't leave the babies," Clara replied, adjusting the blanket covering Michael and Gabriel. "Besides, Miss Ellie trusts me more. I was the one who looked after her when she had that pneumonia last winter." Silver, naturally, insisted on accompanying them. The horse walked silently beside the cart, his ears pricked for any suspicious sound. His white coat gleamed under the moonlight as if made of liquid silver. Miss Ellie's house was on top of a hill, surrounded by a small grove of tall pine trees. It was an old building, over 100 years old, that held enough stories to fill several books. The faint light of an oil lamp shone through the kitchen window. The old woman had a habit of brewing teas late into the night. Before they could even knock, the door opened. Miss Ellie stood on the threshold as if expecting them. She was a small woman, with white hair tied in a neat bun and dark eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said, her wrinkled face breaking into a gentle smile. Come in, come in. The night air isn't for conversations out in the open." Clara and Peter exchanged surprised glances, but followed the old woman inside. The kitchen was warm and inviting, smelling of herbs and freshly baked bread. Silver remained in the yard, but kept his eyes fixed on the window. "So," Miss Ellie began, pouring tea into antique porcelain cups, "you found the twins. It wasn't a question. Clara almost dropped her cup. How did you know? Oh, my dear, sighed the old woman sitting at the table. I knew their mother. Helena was her name. A beautiful girl with a voice that made the birds stop to listen. She used to come play the piano here on Sunday afternoons. Peter carefully placed the basket with the babies on the table. Miss Ellie gently pulled back the blanket, her eyes filling with tears as she saw the small sleeping faces. They looked just like her, she murmured. The same delicate features, the same soft chin. Then her gaze met the locket Clara held in her hands. And I see you also found the proof. Proof? Peter asked, leaning forward. So you know what happened? Miss Ellie rose slowly and walked to an old, intricately carved wooden chest. From inside, she retrieved a yellowed envelope. Helena left this with me in case anything happened to her. She knew she was in danger. With trembling hands, Clara opened the envelope. Inside were several letters, all written in elegant handwriting, and a few photographs. The letters were from Edward Davenport, dated months ago, filled with declarations of love and promises of a future together. Edward met her during a recital in the city, Miss Ellie explained. It was love at first sight, at least for Helena. She was young, talented, a dreamer. He was rich, powerful, and married. Married? Clara exclaimed, horrified. Not officially, but promised in a family arrangement to the daughter of an influential politician. When Helena found out she was pregnant, Edward changed completely. He threatened to destroy her if she didn't disappear from his life. One of the babies stirred in his sleep, letting out a soft sigh. Miss Ellie smiled sadly. Helena came to live with me during her pregnancy. We planned to run away together after the birth, to a place where Edward would never find us. But there were complications. She didn't survive, Clara completed, her voice choked. No, the old woman confirmed. But before she passed, she made me promise to protect her children. I failed, her voice trembled. When I heard the babies had disappeared from the hospital, I imagined the worst. Until this morning, when I saw Silver galloping with that basket, Peter frowned. You saw? From my window. This is the only road that leads to the river, and I always watch. I saw Edward pass by very early, and then I saw Silver. I knew something important was happening, but I couldn't interfere. Some things need to run their own course. Clara held the old woman's wrinkled hand. What should we do now? For now, keep the babies safe. I have a plan, but we need to act cautiously. Edward is dangerous, but his real weak point is his sister, Beatrice. She knows nothing of this, and she has a kind heart. If we can reach her— A sharp whinny from Silver interrupted the conversation. Seconds later, headlights illuminated the entrance to the house. Miss Ellie acted quickly, pushing Clara and Peter towards a trap door hidden under the kitchen rug. Quick, she whispered. They can't find you here. Miss Ellie's kitchen trapdoor smelled of damp earth and dried herbs. Clara held the twins against her chest, holding her breath, while Peter hugged her protectively. Above them, they heard the sound of heavy footsteps and gruff voices invading the house. Good evening, Miss Ellie, a familiar male voice sounded. It was Edward Davenport himself. Forgive the late hour, but I need your help with a delicate matter. Edward, the old woman replied, her voice calm and controlled. What a surprise. I haven't seen you since your mother's funeral. How long has it been? 5 years. Clara could imagine the scene above. The small old woman facing the powerful man in her modest kitchen. In the hiding place, one of the babies, Michael, began to stir, threatening to cry. Clara rocked him gently, her heart beating so loudly she feared it could be heard. I came to see if you've had any news of Helena in recent months, Edward continued, his voice taking on a falsely concerned tone. I heard about her pregnancy and wanted to help, but she disappeared so suddenly. "Helena is dead," Ms. Ellie replied curtly. "You know that as well as I do." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Clara felt Peter tense beside her. Outside, they could hear Silver whinnying softly, as if trying to mask any sound the babies might make. "It's a shame," Edward said finally, his voice cold as ice. "And what about the babies? I heard rumors they were twins." "Rumors are like the wind, Edward. They blow everywhere without leaving a trace. Why this sudden interest? As far as I recall, you denied any involvement with Helena." The sound of slow footsteps echoed on the floorboards. Edward was circling the kitchen. "Perhaps I was hasty in my previous actions. I have resources. I could give those children a good future." "If they exist," Ms. Ellie replied. "And if they are alive, perhaps it's better they remain far from your belated generosity." Clara held her breath as she heard something being knocked over, probably Edward hitting some furniture in frustration. Gabriel startled at the noise and began to whimper softly. Peter quickly covered the babies, mouth with his hand gently. "You're hiding something from me." Edward's voice was dangerously controlled. "I suggest you rethink your position. I'm a patient man, but I have my limits. And I'm an old woman who has lived long enough not to fear veiled threats," Ms. Ellie retorted. "If that's all, Edward, I'd like to get back to my tea. It's getting cold." More footsteps, this time heavier. "I will find out the truth, Ms. Ellie. And when I do, I hope you won't regret your choices tonight." The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house, followed by the noise of a car driving away. Even so, Clara and Peter remained, motionless in the hiding place, waiting for Ms. Ellie's signal. After what seemed like an eternity, the trapdoor lid opened. The old woman's worried face appeared in the opening. "You can come up now, but you need to be quick. He might have left someone watching the house." Once back in the kitchen, Clara noticed her legs were trembling. The babies, miraculously, had remained quiet, as if they understood the gravity of the situation. "Edward is getting desperate," Ms. Ellie said, pouring more tea for everyone. "That makes him even more dangerous. We need to act faster than I planned. What do you suggest?" Peter asked, helping Clara to sit down. The old woman walked to the window, observing the night outside. Silver stood under an old oak tree, his white coat gleaming in the moonlight. "Beatrice Davenport, Edward's sister, is staying in town. She came to investigate the disappearance of her nephews on her own." "How do you know that?" Clara questioned, cradling the twins. "I have my contacts." The old woman smiled mysteriously. Beatrice always suspected her brother's actions, especially after Helena disappeared. She could be our greatest ally. "But how do we reach her?" Peter seemed skeptical. "Edward is certainly monitoring all his sister's movements." Ms. Ellie took a small piece of paper from her apron pocket. "She'll be at the farmer's market tomorrow, disguised. I have a plan, but you'll need to trust me completely." Her eyes shone with an ancient wisdom. "And we'll need Silver's special help." Clara and Peter exchanged glances. In less than 2 days, their lives had transformed into a complex web of secrets and dangers. But looking at the sleeping faces of the twins, they knew there was no turning back. They were committed to this battle, no matter the cost. "What do we need to do?" Clara asked, her voice firm despite her fear. Ms. Ellie smiled, beginning to detail her plan as the night wore on, and Silver kept his tireless watch outside, protecting the unlikely family that fate had brought together. The next morning dawned, covered in a dense fog, as if nature itself wanted to aid Ms. Ellie's plan. Clara was nervous as she prepared the twins for the risky mission. She dressed them in simple clothes that the old woman had kept, small items that had once belonged to the children of old acquaintances. "Are you sure this will work?" she asked for the 10th time, adjusting the small cap on Gabriel's head. "The Thursday farmers' market has always been the meeting point for the whole county," Ms. Ellie replied, preparing a basket with herbs and produce from her garden. Beatrice knows this. She'll come disguised, looking for information about Helena and the babies. No one will suspect an old lady selling her medicinal herbs, accompanied by her young helper. The plan was simple in theory, but fraught with risks. Clara would go with Ms. Ellie to the market, bringing the twins as if they were the children of a distant cousin. Peter would stay at the Miller farm, maintaining a normal routine so as not to arouse suspicion. Silver, naturally, had his own role in the plan. "Remember," the old woman instructed as they climbed into the cart, "Beatrice will be wearing a simple blue dress and a straw hat. She always wears a butterfly brooch on her lapel. It's her trademark, something Edward never noticed as significant." Clara nodded, her heart pounding. The twins slept peacefully in the specially prepared basket, covered with simple blankets that hid their almost identical features. Silver followed beside the cart, as always, his presence bringing a strange comfort. The town's farmers' market was already bustling when they arrived. Vendors arranged their stalls, the smell of fresh bread and coffee mingled in the air, and the first customers circulated among the stands, choosing the best products. Ms. Ellie established her strategic point, a small stall near the center of the market with a privileged view of all entrances. Her herbs and homemade potions soon attracted attention, especially from older ladies who knew well the effectiveness of her natural remedies. Clara pretended to help with sales, her eyes constantly alert. The twins miraculously remained calm, only occasionally making small sounds that were lost in the market's hubbub. It was almost noon when she saw her, an elegant woman despite her simple clothes, walking with natural grace among the stalls. The blue dress and straw hat matched the description, and there it was, the butterfly brooch, delicate and discreet, pinned to her collar. Miss Ellie noticed too. With a gentle movement, she picked up a small sprig of lavender and purposefully let it fall as Beatrice passed her stall. The woman, polite as she was, immediately bent down to pick up the sprig. "Oh, thank you so much, dear," Miss Ellie said, her voice carrying a special meaning. "Lavender always reminds me of Helena. She adored the scent." The effect was immediate. Beatrice froze for a moment, her eyes meeting the old woman's. You knew Helena?" "Why don't you have a cup of tea with me?" Miss Ellie invited, indicating the small bench behind the stall. "Clara, dear, can you mind the sales for a moment?" While the two women talked in low voices, Clara remained vigilant. It was then she noticed suspicious movement. Two men in suits, out of place in the market environment, circulating among the stalls. They were the same men who had visited her house. As if sensing danger, Silver, who was tied near the stall, began to stir. The movement caught the men's attention, and they began to approach. Clara felt panic rise in her chest. It was then that Silver did something extraordinary. The horse, with a precise movement, broke free from his tether and bolted through the market, knocking over some empty crates. The chaos was immediate. People screaming, stalls being pushed aside, the men in suits forced to chase after the animal to prevent further problems. Taking advantage of the distraction, Miss Ellie quickly passed a folded piece of paper to Beatrice. "Tomorrow, this address, at sunset. Come alone." Beatrice tucked the paper into her pocket, her eyes shining with unshed tears. When she passed Clara, she stopped for a moment, her gaze falling on the basket where the babies slept. For an instant, Clara was sure she had recognized something familiar in the small faces. "What beautiful babies," Beatrice murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "Take good care of them." Minutes later, Silver calmly returned to the stall as if nothing had happened. The men in suits, sweaty and disheveled, gave up the chase and left the market. Clara let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "First part completed," Miss Ellie whispered, packing up her goods. "Now comes the hardest." Clara looked At the twins, then at Silver, and finally at the sky that was beginning to darken with rain clouds. Fate had set all these pieces in motion, and now there was no turning back. The next stage of the plan would be even more dangerous, but she was prepared to face anything to protect these little beings that fate had entrusted to her care. The rain began to fall late that afternoon, first as a fine drizzle, then transforming into a furious storm that seemed to herald the dramatic events to come. At Miss Ellie's house, Clara rocked the twins while watching the raindrops run down the window, forming small rivers on the fogged glass. "Will she come in this storm?" asked Peter, who had arrived earlier to help with preparations for the meeting. "Beatrice Davenport isn't one to be intimidated by a little rain," Miss Ellie replied, lighting a few more candles to illuminate the room. The storm had knocked out the electricity in the entire area. "In fact, this is perfect. No one in their right mind would leave home on a night like this." As if to confirm her words, a deafening thunderclap shook the house's windows. Michael and Gabriel, surprisingly, weren't frightened. On the contrary, they seemed fascinated by the spectacle of light and sound that nature provided. Silver was restless in the stable, his occasional whinnies sounding like warnings. The animal had refused to come inside, preferring to keep guard. In the rain, his attentive eyes fixed on the road leading to the property. Only a few minutes remained until the appointed time when Silver let out a different whinny, not of warning, but of recognition. Seconds later, headlights cut through the darkness, and a modest car parked near the house. Beatrice Davenport emerged from the vehicle, shielding herself from the rain with a simple umbrella. She was dressed discreetly, but it was impossible to hide her aristocratic origins in the way she carried herself. The butterfly brooch still adorned her outfit, sparkling in the lightning flashes. "Come in! Come in!" Miss Ellie hurried, opening the door. "You're soaked. Clara, get her a towel. And please." As soon as she entered the candlelit room, Beatrice stopped abruptly. Her eyes, identical to her brother's in color but completely different in expression, fixed on the babies Clara held. For a moment, no one moved or breathed. "It's them, isn't it?" Beatrice whispered, her voice choked. "Helena's children." Clara nodded slowly, approaching so the woman could see the twins better. Beatrice brought her hands to her mouth, tears streaming freely down her face. "I knew it," she said, extending trembling arms to touch the small faces. "When I saw them at the market, my heart knew immediately. They have her eyes and their noses, just like my brother's when he was a baby." It was at that moment something extraordinary happened. Gabriel, who was usually quieter than his brother, broke into a radiant smile for his aunt, extending his small hand towards her. The gesture, so simple and pure, broke down the last barriers of reserve in the room. "I need to tell you something," Beatrice said, sitting heavily in an armchair. "Something I discovered today after the market. Something terrible." Everyone gathered around, forming an intimate circle illuminated by the flickering candlelight. Outside, the storm raged with greater force, as if wanting to drown out the revelations to come. "Edward, my brother." Beatrice took a deep breath, as if the words caused her physical pain. "He didn't just abandon Helena. He prevented her from receiving adequate medical care during childbirth." Clara stifled a cry. Peter clenched his fists. Miss Ellie just closed her eyes, as if confirming something she already suspected. "I found the records today," Beatrice continued. "He bribed hospital staff to transfer her to an isolated wing with doctors he trusted. Helena had complications that could have been easily treated in a proper surgical center, but..." A particularly loud thunderclap interrupted her. At the same instant, Silver let out a sharp whinny of warning. "Quick!" Peter shouted, running to the window. Cars approaching, lots of them. Multiple headlights cut through the storm's darkness, advancing along the road towards the house. Beatrice paled. "Edward," she whispered. "He must have followed me, or maybe he bugged my phone. I was so foolish." "There's no time for recriminations," Miss Ellie declared with surprising firmness for her age. "Clara, Peter, take the babies and follow me. Beatrice, you come too. We have an emergency escape plan." "But where to?" Clara asked, hugging the twins tightly. In response, a loud whinny sounded from outside. Silver had positioned himself near a side door of the house, as if indicating the way. "Follow the horse," Miss Ellie ordered, guiding them down a dark hallway. "He knows the safe path through the valley. I'll buy some time here." "We can't leave you," Clara protested. The old woman smiled, a serene and confident smile. "My dear, I'm over 80, and I know all the secrets of this region. Edward Davenport may be powerful in the city, but here is my territory." The headlights were already illuminating the front yard when the small group escaped through the back door, plunging into the storm. Silver awaited them, his white coat shining like a beacon in the darkness. The night that followed would be the longest of their lives. The rain punished the small group mercilessly as they followed Silver through the dark valley. Clara and Peter had improvised protection for the twins, using wax tarps Miss Ellie kept in storage, but it was still a risky journey for such young babies. "I know a place," Beatrice said, her voice almost lost in the howling wind. "An old country house that belonged to our grandmother. Edward was never interested in it. He probably doesn't even remember it exists." Silver seemed to understand the plan perfectly, leading the group along ancient, almost invisible trails, avoiding the main roads. The horse chose surprisingly dry and firm paths, as if he knew every inch of that territory. Suddenly, a flash of headlights cut through the darkness in the distance, followed by the sound of engines. The group quickly took shelter behind a cluster of rocks, while Silver positioned himself strategically to block any reflection his white coat might cause. "They're searching in all directions," Beatrice whispered. "Edward must have mobilized all his men." As if responding to her words, the sound of sirens began to echo through the valley. Peter looked at Beatrice with a questioning expression. "He must have activated his contacts in the police force," she explained bitterly. "My brother has half the county's police in his pocket." The twins, miraculously, remained calm, as if they understood the gravity of the situation. Michael occasionally let out small sighs, always immediately soothed by Gabriel, in an early demonstration of the special bond between them. "We need to move," Peter declared, observing more headlights appearing in other directions. "They're closing in." Silver took the lead again, this time guiding them along an even more difficult path, up a steep slope. The rain had lessened to a fine drizzle, but the ground was treacherous, and each step had to be carefully calculated. "This is where Helena and I used to play as children," Beatrice commented as they climbed. There was a network of natural tunnels we used as a hideout. Edward never liked exploring the property. He preferred to stay home studying or planning his future businesses. Clara, walking just behind her, noticed how Beatrice's voice trembled when she spoke of the past. "Were you and Helena close?" "She was the sister I never had," Beatrice replied, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "When I met her at the recitals, it was an instant connection. Helena had a way of seeing the world that was magical. Her music wasn't just music, it was poetry. It was life." A distant thunderclap interrupted the conversation, followed by a soft whinny from Silver. The horse had stopped in front of a dense thicket of bushes that at first glance seemed impenetrable. "It can't be," Beatrice murmured, approaching. Carefully, she pushed aside some branches, revealing a narrow opening in the rock. "The tunnel! It's still here!" Peter examined the entrance with his flashlight. "It looks stable. Where does it lead?" "Directly to the country house." "Beatrice, replied, a hopeful smile appearing on her face. It was our secret path. Only Helena and I knew about it. But what about Silver? Clara asked, worried. He won't be able to pass through here. In response, the horse gently nudged Clara towards the entrance, as if to say he would find his own way. He's smarter than we imagine, Peter said, impressed. He probably knows an alternative route. After a brief hesitation, the group entered the tunnel. It was narrow but surprisingly well preserved. Beatrice led the way, remembering every turn and fork with a memory sharpened by urgency. They walked for nearly half an hour through the tunnel, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly on the stone walls. The babies, lulled by the constant movement and the rhythmic sound of steps, fell asleep in their improvised carriers. Finally, Beatrice stopped. Above them, a network of roots formed an intricate pattern on the tunnel ceiling. We're here. The exit is just above, inside the house's cellar. With a joint effort, they managed to open the camouflaged trapdoor. One by one, they emerged into a dusty but surprisingly dry and well-preserved cellar. "Welcome to Rosewood Manor," Beatrice said, her voice thick with emotion. "The last place on earth Edward would think to look in." She had barely finished speaking when a familiar whinny sounded from outside the house. Rushing to a small cellar window, they saw Silver standing in the backyard, as if he had always known exactly where to find them. "Incredible," Clara murmured, observing the animal, who once again proved to be much more than he appeared. But there was no time for admiration. Distant sounds of vehicles and voices indicated that the search continued outside. The group needed to act quickly to turn this improvised refuge into a safe hideout. What none of them knew was that Rosewood Manor held its own secrets, secrets that could completely change the course of their story. Rosewood Manor proved to be a charming building, even covered by the patina of time. Its spacious rooms, though dusty, retained the elegance of a more refined era. Beatrice moved through the space with familiarity, lighting old oil lamps she found along the way, as the electricity had been cut off for years. "Helena used to play piano in this room," she said, stopping before a grand piano covered by a yellowed sheet. Carefully, she removed the fabric, revealing the instrument, still majestic despite its abandonment. "We spent hours here, she playing, me dreaming. It was our refuge when the world outside seemed too heavy." Clara, who had found a suitable room to accommodate the twins, returned to the main room. The babies finally fell sound asleep. Considering everything they've been through today, they're true warriors. Peter was busy checking the house's entrances, making sure they were all secure. "I found some basic supplies in the pantry," he reported. "Someone has been keeping this place stocked." Beatrice nodded. "Miss Ellie, she always knew the importance of this house. In fact," she hesitated, moving to an old bookshelf. With skilled fingers, she pressed a specific spot on the carved wood, revealing a secret compartment. "Helena left something here." From the hiding place, she retrieved a thick envelope and a small red leather-bound diary. "She made me promise to keep this if anything happened, but I never had the courage to open it." With trembling hands, Beatrice handed the items to Clara. "I think you should be the first to read it. You're taking care of her children, after all." Clara sat in an old armchair, the diary's leather soft beneath her fingers. On the first page, delicate handwriting filled the paper. "To my children, Michael and Gabriel, so that one day you may know the truth about your mother and understand that every note I played, every song I composed was a declaration of love for you." The following pages revealed Helena's story, her passion for music since childhood, her years of study at the conservatory, the recitals that led her to meet Edward, the love that blossomed between them, initially pure and true, at least on her part. "Edward was different at first," Beatrice commented, reading over Clara's shoulder. Helena's music transformed him. It was as if, only when he was with her, he could be who he truly was, without family pressures, without the obsession for power. A soft whinny from Silver interrupted the reading. The horse, keeping watch in the garden, had approached one of the windows. His intelligent eyes seemed to follow every word read. "There's more," Beatrice said, opening the envelope. From it, several handwritten musical scores and some official documents fell out. "These are Helena's last compositions, and—" Her voice failed. "The deed to this house. Helena bought it secretly with money from her performances. It's in the babies' names." Peter, examining the documents, frowned. "This changes everything. If Edward finds out—" "He already has," a weak voice sounded from the doorway, startling everyone. Miss Ellie stood at the entrance, leaning on her cane, her clothes soaked and her face tired, but her eyes shining with determination. "How did you find us?" Clara asked. Rushing to help the old woman sit down. "I followed Silver," she replied simply, "but we don't have much time. Edward found the house purchase documents at the old county clerk's office. He's coming here." "But how?" Beatrice seemed stunned. "No one knew about this place. The clerk," Miss Ellie coughed lightly. "Edward convinced him to reveal all of Helena's records. He knows about the deed, knows the babies are the legitimate heirs, not only to this house, but to a considerable part of his family's fortune." "What do you mean?" Peter approached, intrigued. "Edward and Beatrice's grandmother, the former owner of this house, left a will. Any descendant born here would be entitled to a significant share of the family inheritance." Miss Ellie paused dramatically. "Helena gave birth to the twins here, in this house. She planned everything, knowing it would be her only way to secure her children's future." A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by the distant sound of approaching engines. "They're coming," Miss Ellie said, rising with difficulty. "But we still have one last card up our sleeve. Helena left more than sheet music and documents in this house. She left the final proof of Edward's cruelty." Silver whinnied again, more urgently this time. The lights of headlights began to illuminate the garden of Rosewood Manor, announcing that the final confrontation was about to begin. The car headlights cut through the darkness of Rosewood Manor's garden like knives of light, creating dancing shadows on the old walls. Miss Ellie moved with surprising agility for her age, guiding the group to the grand piano. "Helena was much smarter than Edward ever imagined," the old woman said, her wrinkled fingers gliding over the piano keys purposefully. "She knew she would need concrete proof against him, something that not all the money in the world could buy or hide." With precision born of familiarity, Miss Ellie pressed a specific sequence of keys. A soft click echoed from inside the instrument, and a secret compartment opened on the side of the piano, revealing a small digital recorder and several carefully labeled cassette tapes. "Helena recorded all her conversations with Edward," Beatrice explained, her eyes wide with understanding. "The piano, she always insisted on playing when he came to see her here." "Exactly," Miss Ellie confirmed, carefully removing the material. "Every threat, every broken promise, every plan to get rid of her and the children, it's all here." The sound of car doors slamming reached them, followed by male voices and footsteps on the porch. Silver, still in the garden, let out a warning whinny. "Clara, Peter," Miss Ellie called urgently. "Take the twins to the cellar. Beatrice and I will receive Edward." "We can't leave you alone," Clara protested. "You can and you must," the old woman's voice was firm. "Those babies are our priority. Besides," a sly smile crossed her wrinkled face, "Edward isn't the only one with powerful connections in this county." As if to confirm her words, the sound of more approaching cars filled the air. Peter, peeking through the window, saw police cruisers parking alongside Edward's cars. "Captain Rostova!" Miss Ellie exclaimed with satisfaction upon hearing an authoritative female voice giving orders outside. "I always knew that coffee and cake I sent her earlier today would do the trick." Loud knocks sounded on the main door. Clara and Peter, reluctantly, picked up the sleeping twins and headed for the cellar. Beatrice took a deep breath, adjusted her butterfly brooch, and walked to open the door. Edward Davenport stormed into the room, his grey eyes glinting with fury. He stopped abruptly upon seeing Miss Ellie calmly seated at the piano, her hands resting on the keys like a pianist about to begin a concert. "What a pleasant surprise, Edward," the old woman said, her voice as sweet as poisoned honey. "I was just thinking of playing something in your honor. How about that song Helena composed especially for you? The one she played the night you promised to leave your fiancé and acknowledge the babies." Edward's face visibly paled. "What are you talking about, you crazy old woman?" "Oh, forgive me," Miss Ellie continued, pressing a key that produced a sharp, solitary note. "Perhaps you'd prefer to hear the recording of the night you threatened to solve the problem if she didn't disappear." "Enough!" thundered Edward, advancing menacingly. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Captain Rostova's voice cut through the air like steel. She stood in the doorway, her posture exuding authority. "We have a lot to talk about, Mr. Davenport." Edward spun on his heels, his face a mask of arrogance. "Not without my lawyer." "Oh, but he's already on his way," Miss Ellie smiled. "Along with representatives from the district attorney's office and child protective services. See how I thought of everything." A loud whinny sounded from the garden, followed by the soft cry of a baby. Edward froze, his eyes fixed in the direction of the sound. "Your children, Edward," Beatrice said softly. "They're here. And this time you can't just throw them in the river and pretend they don't exist." "You can't prove anything," he hissed, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. Miss Ellie began to play the piano softly, a sad, familiar melody. Helena's voice filled the room through the hidden recorder. "Please, Edward, they're your children. Our children." "Stop!" he shouted, his hands trembling. "Stop it!" Captain Rostova gave a signal, and two officers entered the room. "Mr. Davenport, you're being detained for questioning. We have some questions about the disappearance of Helena Martinez and the attempted murder of 2 newborns. As the officers handcuffed Edward, Silver appeared at the window, his majestic presence, like that of a silent judge. The powerful man, upon seeing the horse, seemed to deflate, as if finally understanding that his kingdom of lies was crumbling. In the cellar, Clara hugged the twins, silent tears streaming down her face. Helena's voice, continuing to play through. The recorder seemed to lull the babies, like a lullaby crossing time to reach her children. Dawn found Rosewood Manor in a state of surreal calm after the previous night's storm. Edward had been taken away by the police, and Captain Rostova remained on the property with a few officers to ensure everyone's safety. In the garden, Silver grazed peacefully, as if he knew his protective mission had been successfully accomplished. Clara was in the kitchen, preparing bottles for the twins, when Beatrice entered, carrying an old box she had found in the attic. "Look what I discovered," she said, placing the box on the table. "These are Helena's original scores, all the music she composed during her pregnancy." Carefully, Beatrice removed the yellowed sheets. Each score had a poetic title and a special dedication. Symphony of First Kicks, Dawn Duet, Lullaby for 2 Angels. All were dedicated to Michael and Gabriel. She planned everything down to the smallest detail, commented Miss Ellie, who was watching from the kitchen doorway. Every song, every hidden document, every recording. Helena knew that one day the truth would need to come out. Peter entered carrying the twins, who had just woken up. The little ones seemed calmer than ever, as if they sensed the danger had passed. Gabriel smiled upon seeing Beatrice, reaching his little arms out to her. "They look so much like her," Beatrice whispered, taking her nephew in her arms. They have the same sweet smile, the same curious gaze. Captain Rostova joined the group, her professional demeanor softened by the family scene she encountered. "I have news," she announced. "The recordings have been accepted as evidence, and Ms. Ellie's testimony has been officially recorded. Edward won't escape this time." "And what about the babies?" Clara asked, her voice betraying the worry that consumed her. After everything they had been through together, the idea of being separated from the twins seemed unbearable. "Well," the captain smiled, "that's where things get interesting. Helena left a will, properly registered, naming Beatrice as the legal guardian of the twins if anything happened to her." Beatrice's eyes widened in surprise. "She never told me." "Your friend thought of everything," the captain continued. "But there's more. She also expressed a wish for the children to be raised here at Rosewood Manor and to have godparents who could offer the love and protection she couldn't provide." All eyes turned to Clara and Peter. The couple looked at each other, moved, understanding what this meant. "You saved my nephews," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "I can't think of anyone better to be a part of their lives." At that moment, a soft sound began to fill the house. Piano notes, delicate and melancholic. Everyone turned, surprised, but the piano room was empty. The sound seemed to come from the air itself, like a musical memory coming to life. "Helena's piano," Miss Ellie whispered. "Sometimes, on quiet mornings, it plays by itself, as if she's still here, watching over her children." The twins, upon hearing the music, became extraordinarily quiet, their little eyes shining with an attention that seemed beyond their age. Michael let out a small sigh that sounded almost like a musical note. Silver approached the kitchen window, his muzzle gently touching Clara's hand. The horse, who had been an instrument of fate in that incredible story, seemed to approve of the new arrangements. "I think it's settled then," Miss Ellie smiled. "Rosewood Manor will once again be a home full of music, love and family, exactly as Helena always dreamed." "But there's still so much to be done," Peter pondered. "The house needs renovations. We need to organize the paperwork. And I need to learn how to be an aunt," Beatrice added, snuggling Gabriel closer. "And a godmother, and a legal guardian." "We'll do it together," Clara declared firmly. "All of us. For Helena, for Michael and Gabriel, for everything we've been through to get here." The piano music continued, soft and comforting, like a silent blessing on this unlikely family that fate had brought together. Outside, the sun shone with full force, drying the last vestiges of the previous night's storm. Captain Rostova made some notes in her pad. "I'll need statements from all of you in the coming days," she said. "But for now, stay here. The house is secure, and you deserve this moment of peace." Miss Ellie walked to the window, observing Silver in the garden. "You know," she said, her voice filled with wisdom, "some people would say this was all just coincidence, a horse that saved 2 babies, a piano that plays by itself, a series of events that fit together perfectly. And what would you say?" Clara asked, curious. The old woman smiled, her eyes shining with ancient knowledge. "I'd say there are forces in the world we can't explain. Love, protection, justice. Sometimes they manifest in the most extraordinary ways." Michael let out a small laugh, as if agreeing, and soon Gabriel joined him. The sound of their laughter mingled with the piano music, creating a perfect harmony that filled Rosewood Manor with hope and promises of a better future. The days that followed were intense at Rosewood Manor. The news of Edward Davenport's arrest, one of the most powerful men in the region, caused a veritable social earthquake. Journalists surrounded the property, eager for details of the extraordinary story involving abandoned babies, a heroic horse, and a young musician who had planned her own protection even after death. Clara and Peter, with Beatrice's help, transformed. the old house into a true home. The rooms were cleaned and renovated, maintaining their original elegance but adding modern touches necessary for the baby's comfort. The room that had once belonged to Helena was converted into a cozy nursery, decorated with musical notes painted on the walls. One particularly significant morning, Beatrice found something special while organizing the old study. A sealed envelope, dated the day before the twins' birth. Inside was a letter from Helena, addressed to her children, to be read when they grew older. "My beloved Michael and Gabriel," the letter began, her handwriting revealing the emotion of the moment. "If you are reading this, it means my plan worked. It means that good and brave people protected you, that love was stronger than hate, that the truth finally came to light." The letter continued for several pages, recounting not only Helena and Edward's story, but also her hopes and dreams for her children. "Don't carry the weight of the past," she had written. "Every note I played, every song I composed was a celebration of the love I feel for you. Music has the power to heal, to transform, to unite. This will be my legacy to you." That same afternoon, something extraordinary happened. Beatrice, who had inherited her friend's musical talent, sat at the piano to play one of Helena's compositions. The moment the first notes filled the room, the twins, who were in Clara's lap, reacted surprisingly. Michael and Gabriel, still so small, turned their little heads towards the music, their eyes shining with a special intensity. And then, to everyone's astonishment, they began to move in perfect synchrony, as if dancing to the sound of the melody. "It's incredible," Miss Ellie whispered, watching the scene. "They recognize their mother's music. It's as if Helena is here dancing with them." Silver, who now had free access to the house, approached the piano, his ears attentive to every note. The horse, who had become a kind of silent guardian to the twins, seemed especially serene when Helena's music filled the room. Captain Rostova, who visited regularly to update the family on the case, brought important news that day. "Edward confessed everything," she announced. "The abandonment of the babies, the medical negligence that led to Helena's death, the threats, everything. The recordings were crucial, but it was his secretary's testimony that closed the case." "The secretary?" Peter asked, surprised. "Yes. Apparently, she kept a detailed journal of all of Edward's suspicious actions. When she heard about his arrest, she decided to hand everything over to the police, said she couldn't bear to carry that weight on her conscience anymore." Clara, cradling the twins who now slept peacefully, felt a wave of relief wash over her. "So it's over? Are they really safe now?" "More than that," the captain smiled. "The judge issued the final custody order today. Beatrice is officially the legal guardian, with you two registered as godparents, with special rights and responsibilities. No one can separate this family." The captain's words were met with tears of joy. Beatrice rushed to hug Clara and the babies, while Peter tried to hide the emotion that overwhelmed him. "Helena would be so happy," Miss Ellie said, her voice choked. "She always said that music had the power to unite souls, to create bonds stronger than blood." As if responding to her words, the piano began to play by itself again, this time a soft, joyful melody that no one had heard before. The twins, still sleeping, smiled in their sleep. "A new composition," Beatrice murmured, amazed. "It's as if Helena is celebrating with us." Silver whinnied softly, approaching the babies, the horse that had changed the fate of so many lives. With a single act of courage, seemed to perfectly understand the importance of that moment. The afternoon progressed slowly, the setting sun painting Rosewood Manor in golden hues. The piano music continued, mingling with the sound of the wind in the trees and the soft sighs of the twins. It was a symphony of life, of love, of family, a promise that the days of fear and loneliness were behind them. Autumn arrived at Rosewood Manor, bringing a gentle shower of golden leaves and an air of renewal. 3 months had passed since Edward's arrest, and life had found a new rhythm in that house now, overflowing with love and music. The twins grew strong and healthy, surrounded by a family that, though unconventional, was deeply devoted. On a special afternoon, Rosewood Manor was preparing for an important event, the first charity recital organized by Beatrice in Helena's memory. The old music room had been restored to its original glory, and the grand piano shone under the light, streaming through the French windows. Helena always wanted to use music to help other single mothers, Beatrice explained as she adjusted the sheet music on the piano. Now we can fulfill that dream through the Helena Martinez Foundation. Clara, who was nursing Michael, while Peter rocked Gabriel, smiled in approval. And to think it all started with an act of desperation from Edward. He never imagined his actions would end up creating something so beautiful. Miss Ellie, who had moved into a small cottage at the back of the property, entered the room carrying an object covered with a velvet cloth. "I found this morning, hidden in a trunk in the attic," she said, carefully removing the fabric. It was a portrait of Helena, painted during her pregnancy. On the canvas, she was seated at the piano, her face radiant with happiness, her hands resting gently on her belly. The artist had perfectly captured her essence, the mix of strength and delicacy that characterized her. "It will look perfect here," Beatrice said, hanging the painting above the piano. "This way, she'll be present in every note we play." The sound of hooves in the garden announced Silver's arrival. The horse, who now had a specially built stable near the house, continued to be a constant presence in the twins' lives. Whenever the babies cried, he would appear at the windows as if to make sure they were okay. "You know," Peter commented, watching Silver through the window, "sometimes I wonder if he isn't some kind of guardian angel. The way he found the babies, how he guided us here." "Some things don't need an explanation," Miss Ellie replied with her wise smile. "Love has many ways of manifesting." The afternoon wore on, and guests began to arrive for the recital. Among them was Captain Rostova, who brought important news. "Edward's trial is concluded," she informed them. "In addition to the sentence for attempted murder and negligence resulting in death, he will have to donate half of his fortune to institutions supporting single mothers and vulnerable children." "Helena would have approved," Beatrice said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "She always believed that something good could come even from the worst situations." The recital began at sunset. Beatrice played Helena's compositions with palpable emotion, each note laden with memories and meaning. The twins, now 4 months old, remained extraordinarily calm during the music, their little eyes fixed on the piano as if they could see something the adults couldn't. During a pause between songs, something magical happened. A ray of sunlight entering through the window at a specific angle illuminated Helena's portrait, creating a lighting effect that seemed to make her smile come alive. In the same instant, the piano began to play by itself, not a sad or melancholic melody, but a joyful and hopeful composition that no one had heard before. "It's a celebration," Miss Ellie whispered, as everyone watched in amazement. "Helena is telling us she's happy that we passed her test of love and courage." Clara hugged the twins tightly, feeling an inexplicable wave of gratitude. Peter intertwined his fingers with hers, while Beatrice joined them, forming a protective circle around the children. Silver, watching everything from the music room window, whinnied softly, as if adding his own note to the symphony filling the room. The setting sun transformed his white coat into liquid gold, creating an almost ethereal image. "I think I finally understand," Clara said, her voice choked with emotion. "It wasn't just Silver who saved the babies that day. It was Helena's love reaching across time, using every possible means to protect her children. And now, Beatrice completed, that same love has united us, created a family where before there was only loneliness and fear. The piano music continued, mingling with the baby's laughter, Silver's soft whinny, and the emotional murmurs of the guests. It was a symphony of life, of new beginnings, of love that transcends barriers and transforms destinies. Rosewood Manor, once a refuge of secrets and sorrows, had transformed into a sanctuary of hope and renewal. And in every note that echoed through its halls, Helena's spirit lived on, eternally dancing in the music that was her greatest legacy of love. 5 years passed since that stormy night when 2 tiny babies were saved by a white horse at the edge of a distant river. Rosewood Manor, once an abandoned house full of secrets, now overflowed with life and joy. The garden, carefully tended by Peter, exploded in color with roses of every shade, Helena's favorites. Michael and Gabriel, now lively 5-year-old boys, ran through the garden under Silver's watchful eye. The horse, though older, maintained the same majestic posture and the same protective instinct as always. The twins had developed an extraordinary connection to music, something Beatrice said was a direct inheritance from Helena. "Aunt Bee!" Michael called, running into the house. "Look what Gabriel and I found!" Beatrice, who was organizing sheet music at the piano, smiled as her nephews entered carrying a small, blue, leather-bound notebook. "What's this, my loves?" "It was hidden inside the piano," Gabriel explained, his eyes shining with excitement. "It appeared when we were pretending to compose, just like Mommy used to." Clara, entering the room at that moment, approached curiously. The notebook contained unpublished compositions by Helena, all dedicated to the moment she imagined sharing with her children. First word, first steps, first smile. She composed a song for every important moment she knew she couldn't witness, Beatrice whispered, moved, so that in some way she could be present in the boys' lives. Miss Ellie, who at 95 still maintained her sharp wisdom, smiled from her favorite spot by the window. Helena always knew that love would find a way, through music, through Silver, through all of us. As if responding to the mention of his name, Silver appeared at the music room window. The years had sprinkled his white coat with silver flecks, but his eyes retained the same extraordinary intelligence. "Grandma Ellie," Michael called, using the affectionate nickname he had given the old woman. "Tell us the story again of how Silver saved us." The old story, which had already been told hundreds of times, gained a special dimension that afternoon. The twins sat at Ms. Ellie's feet, while Clara, Peter, and Beatrice settled on the sofas. It was a story that never lost its magic, no matter how many times it was repeated. "But do you know what's most extraordinary?" Ms. Ellie said, reaching the end of the narrative. "True love has many ways of manifesting. Sometimes it's a white horse swimming against the current. Sometimes it's a song playing on an empty piano. Sometimes it's a family formed not by blood, but by heart." At that moment, as occasionally happened at Rosewood Manor, the piano began to play by itself, but this time something different occurred. Michael and Gabriel, moved by an inexplicable impulse, walked to the instrument and for the first time began to play along with the invisible melody. It was one of the compositions they had just discovered, First Duet, and the boys played as if they had known the music forever. Their small hands danced over the keys in perfect harmony with the mysterious notes that filled the air. Clara couldn't hold back her tears. Peter hugged her tightly, while Beatrice held Ms. Ellie's hand. Silver at the window maintained his proud stance, like an eternal guardian of that extraordinary family. The music the twins played spoke of love, of protection, of destinies intertwined in mysterious and beautiful ways. It was a celebration of all they had lived through, of all the people who had united to protect two small lives on a stormy night. "Mommy's playing with us," Gabriel exclaimed, his face lit by a radiant smile. And everyone there knew it was true. Helena was present in every note, in every laugh from the boys, in every whinny from Silver, in every rose that bloomed in the garden. Her love had transcended time and death itself, creating a symphony of life that would continue to echo through generations. Rosewood Manor had become more than a home. It was a living testament that love, in its infinite forms, has the power to transform tragedies into miracles, to unite distant souls, to create family where before there was only loneliness. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of rose and gold, the music continued. Michael and Gabriel played with Helena. Silver watched with his wise eyes, and the love that had saved two lives on a stormy night continued to grow, to flourish and to transform all who were touched by its eternal melody. At Rosewood Manor, the music never stopped. And in every note, in every chord, in every moment of silence between the melodies, a mother's love lived on, protecting, guiding, and blessing this extraordinary family that fate had brought together in such mysterious and beautiful ways.